The atmospheric processor was overheating again, which meant Ethan Cross was spending his fourth consecutive shift lying on burning metal while trying to repair cooling systems that should have been replaced years ago. His radiation badge had gone yellow 2 hours ago, which meant he was approaching exposure limits, but the alternative was letting the unit fail and suffocating 300 colonists who depended on it for breathable air. Ethan didn't consider this heroic. He considered it his job. The fact that his job was slowly killing him while barely paying enough to cover passage debt from Earth was just math, unpleasant but factual. "Hand me the molecular welder," he called to his assigned partner, then remembered Jensen had called in sick again, leaving Ethan to handle critical repairs alone. He stretched awkwardly to reach his toolkit, his back screaming from hours cramped in maintenance tunnels designed for smaller Lithuanian workers. That's when he heard the small voice, "You're hurting yourself." Ethan jerked in surprise, nearly dropping the welder. A Lithuanian girl stood in the maintenance area, maybe 6 or 7 in human equivalent years, her long ears tilted forward with concern. She wore a child's jumpsuit marked with educational facility insignia, and she studied him with uncomfortable intensity. "You shouldn't be here," Ethan said, struggling out from under the processor. "This area is restricted." "Where are your parents?" "My mother knows where I am." The girl moved closer, unfazed by the heat and machinery that should have scared a child. "She's worried about you, human." Ethan blinked sweat from his eyes, trying to process this bizarre interruption. "Your mother doesn't know me." "Yes, she does. She knows you work too much and don't eat enough and your safety badge is the wrong color." The girl pointed at his radiation monitor with alarming accuracy. "She says someone needs to make you stop hurting yourself." "I'm fine, just working, and you need to leave before you get hurt." Ethan returned his attention to the overheating unit, trying to ignore the child who somehow knew too much about his situation. "You're not fine. You're sick from the radiation and you skipped lunch again, and your back hurts because you're too tall for the tunnels, but you won't complain because you need the job." She said it with the certainty children possess when repeating adult observations. "Mother says people who don't complain are either very strong or very hurt, and either way they need someone to notice." Ethan stopped mid-repair. "Who's your mother?" "Thesha Seton. She runs the terraforming systems. She notices lots of things other people don't see." The girl sat down on an equipment crate like she planned to stay. "I'm Myra. Mother says I should make sure you eat something and rest before your next shift." Ethan knew the name Thesha Seton. Everyone on Lithuris Station knew the chief environmental coordinator, who basically ran the infrastructure keeping 40,000 colonists alive. He'd seen her during facility inspections, always professional and efficient, never sparing attention for individual maintenance workers beyond confirming quotas were met. The idea that she'd noticed him specifically, let alone worried enough to send her daughter with messages, was absurd. "Your mother is very kind, but I'm fine. Really." Ethan finished the repair he could reach, noting he'd need to return with proper equipment and hopefully an actual partner. "Now you need to go back to wherever you're supposed to be before someone realizes you're missing." "Mother knows where I am," Myra repeated with calm assurance. "She always knows. And she said I shouldn't leave until you promise to eat something and rest." "I promise." Ethan would have promised anything to get a child out of a dangerous maintenance area. "She also said humans lie when they promise things to make people stop worrying." Myra crossed her arms with an expression suggesting she'd been coached on exactly this possibility. "So you have to actually do it, not just say it." Despite exhaustion and radiation sickness and every reason to be frustrated, Ethan laughed. "Your mother is very thorough." "She has to be. She keeps people alive." Myra stood, apparently satisfied with whatever assessment she'd been making. "I'll tell her you promised, but she'll check tomorrow to make sure you kept it." She left with the confidence of a child, who knew her mother's position, granted immunity from normal rules about restricted areas. Ethan returned to his repairs trying to process the strangest interaction he'd had since arriving on Lithoris 6 months ago. Someone had noticed him, not just noticed his productivity metrics or his reliability in completing dangerous assignments others avoided. Someone had noticed he was hurting himself and decided that mattered. The realization was almost as uncomfortable as the radiation exposure. Over the next week, Myra kept appearing during Ethan's shifts with messages from her mother. Reminders to take his legally mandated rest periods. Suggestions that he visit medical for radiation treatment. Questions about whether his safety equipment was functioning properly. The messages were delivered with childish directness that made them impossible to dismiss as official oversight. This was personal concern expressed through a 6-year-old intermediary, and Ethan still didn't understand why. He finally caught Thesha during a facility inspection, gathering courage to approach someone so far above his station that protocol probably forbade direct conversation without supervisor mediation. Coordinator Seton, may I speak with you? Thesha turned from the equipment manifest she'd been reviewing, and Ethan saw where Myra got her intense observational focus. Gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything, ears tilted in attentive listening. Ethan Cross, Maintenance Specialist, Section 7. Your performance reviews show exceptional reliability. She knew his name and work assignment without checking records. That was somehow more unsettling than her daughter delivering concerned messages. Your daughter has been visiting my shifts, Ethan said carefully, with messages about my health and work conditions. I'm aware. I asked her to convey my concerns since you've been ignoring official communications about mandatory medical appointments and rest period violations. Thesha's tone was professional, but something in her expression suggested this wasn't purely administrative. You've documented radiation exposure beyond safe limits. You're required to receive treatment. Treatment costs money, my contract debt. Your contract debt doesn't supersede safety requirements. Medical care for work-related exposure is covered by facility operations, not personal expense. She tilted her head slightly. Did your supervisor tell you otherwise? Ethan hesitated, unwilling to create problems that might make his situation worse. He said treatment could wait until I'd worked off my passage debt. He lied. Deliberately, I suspect, because healthy workers who know their rights are more expensive than desperate ones who'll accept any conditions. Anger flashed across Thesha's face before professional composure reasserted itself. You'll report to medical tomorrow. I'll ensure the costs are properly allocated. I don't want to cause problems. The only problem is that you've been working under conditions that violate both safety regulations and basic decency, while believing you had no choice. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Why didn't you complain, file a grievance, demand proper conditions? Because complaining gets you fired and deported. I need this job. So you endure silently instead. Something in her expression softened slightly. Myra told me you promised to rest and eat properly. She also told me you're terrible at keeping promises to yourself. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. Your daughter is very perceptive. She inherited that from me, along with the inability to ignore when people are hurting themselves unnecessarily. Thesha returned her attention to her manifest, signaling the conversation was ending. Report to medical tomorrow. That's not a request. She walked away, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers, but at least with the beginning of understanding why a 6-year-old had been delivering concerned messages from her mother. Thesha sat and noticed people others overlooked, and apparently she'd been noticing him. Within a week, Ethan's entire employment situation transformed in ways that felt too significant to be coincidental. His work assignments were restructured to eliminate mandatory overtime. His medical coverage was upgraded to cover full radiation treatment. His quarters were relocated to better housing usually reserved for senior staff. The changes were implemented through official channels that made them look like standard administrative adjustments, but Ethan knew they were direct intervention on his behalf. He tried to thank Thesha during her next inspection visit, but she dismissed his gratitude with Lutheran practicality. I'm correcting inefficiencies in labor allocation that were damaging valuable personnel. That's my job. But Myra's ongoing presence suggested something more personal. The girl kept visiting during his shifts, bringing food her mother had prepared, asking endless questions about Earth and human customs, treating Ethan like family rather than a contract worker her mother supervised. "Why does your mother care?" Ethan asked one day when Myra brought him lunch that was far better than anything he could afford on his own. "I'm just a maintenance worker. There are hundreds of humans on this station." "You don't complain," Myra said simply, repeating the observation she'd made during their first meeting. "Mother says people who protect themselves by staying quiet instead of making noise are the ones nobody protects. So she protects them instead. That's not her responsibility. Mother says when you notice someone hurting, it becomes your responsibility to help if you can. Ignoring it just because you're not required to care is how good people get destroyed by systems that shouldn't exist." Myra said it with the cadence of frequently repeated wisdom. "She says you have the kind of strength she values, the kind that endures without complaint, that protects others even when it costs you, that keeps working when others would have given up." "I just do my job. That's what makes it matter. You don't do it for recognition or because someone's watching. You do it because it needs doing and you're the one there to do it." Myra finished her own lunch, swinging her legs from the equipment crate she'd claimed as her seat. "Mother says that's real strength. Not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that just keeps going." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He'd never thought of his endurance as strength, just survival strategy. But apparently, to Thesha Seton, it meant something worth protecting. That evening, Thesha appeared at the facility as Ethan was finishing his shift. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request, so Ethan fell into step beside her as she navigated through the station's main corridors. Workers, both human and Lutheran, nodded respectfully as she passed, though Ethan noticed several giving him curious or speculative looks. "Myra has become quite attached to you," Thesha said without preamble. "She talks about you constantly. Wants to know when you'll visit our quarters, whether you like Lutheran food, if humans celebrate bonding holidays. She's a wonderful kid. But if her visits are causing problems—" "They're not problems. They're complications, which is different." Thesha stopped at an observation window showing Lithoris's terraformed landscape spreading below the station. "I've been raising Myra alone since her father died 4 years ago. She's been cautious about forming attachments with anyone outside our immediate family. Until you. I don't understand why." "Because you treat her like a person rather than a superior's child. Because you answer her questions honestly instead of patronizing her. Because she sees how her mother respects you, and children notice those things." Thesha was quiet for a moment. "And because I may have inadvertently encouraged her attachment by expressing my own concern too openly." Ethan processed this carefully. "Your own concern." "I notice people, Ethan. It's both professional necessity and personal compulsion. I noticed months ago that you worked harder than others, never complained, and were slowly destroying yourself to meet quotas that shouldn't exist. I noticed that you helped other workers even when it cost you personally. I noticed your quiet strength and your refusal to burden others with your struggles." She met his eyes. "I noticed all of that, and I decided someone should protect a person who wouldn't protect himself." Myra noticed me noticing, and drew her own conclusions about what that meant. "What does it mean?" "That's the complication." Thesha turned away from the window. "I'm your supervisor. There are professional boundaries I shouldn't cross, but those boundaries feel less important than ensuring someone I've come to value isn't destroyed by systems I have the power to change. I don't want to cause problems for your career. You're not causing problems. You're simply existing while possessing qualities I respect enough to support. She smiled slightly. Myra tells me you're terrible at accepting help, that you deflect concern and minimize your own needs. She's not wrong. I've never had much reason to expect help. It's easier to not need it. That's survival thinking, not living thinking, and you deserve better than just surviving. Thesha started walking again. Come to dinner tomorrow. Myra will be insufferable if you refuse, and honestly, I'd like to know you better outside of professional contexts. Is that allowed? I'm the chief environmental coordinator. I decide what's allowed within my own home, but her voice held warmth beneath the authority. Consider it Myra's invitation if that makes accepting easier, though it's mine as well. Ethan agreed because refusing felt impossible, and because some part of him wanted to accept more than caution suggested was wise. Dinner at Thesha's quarters became regular occurrence over the following weeks, initially every few days, then more frequently as the arrangement felt increasingly natural. Myra would greet Ethan with enthusiasm that made his chest hurt in good ways, and Thesha would discuss station operations with a frankness that suggested she'd stopped seeing him as just another worker and started seeing him as someone whose perspective she valued. Other workers noticed the irregular relationship and made assumptions, some crude, some curious, most wrong. But Ethan didn't care about speculation because the reality was simpler and more meaningful than gossip suggested. Thesha had seen someone enduring hardship without complaint and decided that person deserved support. She'd offered it without expectation of anything beyond allowing her to help. And Ethan had accepted, and something genuine had developed from that foundation of mutual respect. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it wasn't purely professional either. It was something that existed between those definitions, built on recognition and care that transcended simple categorization. When Ethan's contract debt was finally paid off after 8 months on Lithoris, Thesha offered him a permanent position with actual benefits and fair compensation. But more than that, she admitted, with visible difficulty because Litherans valued emotional control, that both she and Myra had come to care about him beyond professional capacity. "You remind me of qualities I value most," she said during a dinner that felt more significant than usual. "Quiet strength, refusal to burden others with your struggles, instinct to protect and help without expectation of recognition or reward. Those are rare qualities, and having someone who possesses them in our lives has become something I don't want to lose." Myra, less constrained by adult reserve, simply asked, "Will you stay, please? I like having you around and Mother is happier when you're here." Ethan looked at this unexpected family. He'd found through the simple act of a child saying her mother was worried. He thought about the past months, how concern expressed through a 6-year-old had evolved into genuine care, how professional intervention had become personal connection, how the worst period of his life had somehow led to the best relationships he'd ever had. "I'll stay," he said. "Not because of the better employment terms, though those are appreciated, but because somewhere between Myra's concern and your quiet recognition, I found something I didn't realize I needed." "What's that?" Thesha asked. "People who noticed me not for what I produced but for who I was, who valued resilience not as something to exploit but as character worth supporting." He smiled at Myra, who was practically vibrating with happiness. "Family that chose me because you wanted me here, not because obligation required it." Myra launched herself at him with enthusiasm that knocked him slightly off balance, and Thesha smiled with rare, unguarded warmth that made Ethan understand why her daughter had inherited both her perceptiveness and her caring. They'd found each other through unlikely circumstances. A worker trying to survive, and a coordinator who noticed people others overlooked, and a child who declared her mother was worried. That small beginning had grown into something that mattered more than employment contracts or professional distance could prevent. Some relationships begin with grand gestures or dramatic moments. Others begin with a child's message, a mother's concern, recognition that someone's quiet strength deserves support rather than exploitation. And sometimes those small gestures become foundations for belonging that transcend species, status, or any logical reason why a human maintenance worker and a Lutheran coordinator and her daughter should become family. But they had, through care expressed and accepted, through recognition given and valued, through the simple human and Lutheran truth that sometimes the most important bonds form when someone notices you're hurting and decides that matters more than professional distance or social convention. Ethan stayed on Lithoris not as an indentured worker enduring until escape became possible, but as someone who found home in the unlikeliest place through the unlikeliest means. All because a 6-year-old girl had approached him one day and said her mother was worried. And that concern, unexpected and unearned but genuine, had revealed that he was worth noticing, worth protecting, worth caring about beyond what he could produce or endure. That simple truth, delivered by a child and demonstrated by her mother, became the foundation of belonging Ethan hadn't known he was searching for until he found it. Some debts can't be repaid because they're not transactions, they're gifts freely given. Thesha and Myra had given him recognition and care when he'd expected only exploitation and indifference. In return, he gave them loyalty, presence, and the quiet strength they'd noticed and valued from the beginning. It wasn't equal because love, familial or otherwise, doesn't work on balance sheets. It works on mutual choice to care, to notice, to be present for each other when that presence matters. They'd chosen each other. A coordinator who noticed quiet strength, a worker who'd stopped believing